I still remember the precise moment the temperature changed in my own house. It wasn't a sudden drop, not like a winter draft or a broken thermostat, but a heavy, suffocating shift in the air that makes you feel like you're breathing underwater. Looking back, that was the exact second my life divided itself into a permanent before and after. I was 32 years old, living in a quiet, tree-lined suburb just outside of Austin, Texas, sharing a 3-bedroom craftsman home with my wife, Alina. We had been married for 4 years, together for 7, and if you had asked me on any given Tuesday morning how my life was going, I would have told you I was the luckiest guy in the world. I had a stable job as a senior project manager for a commercial construction firm, a beautiful wife who still made me laugh after a grueling 10-hour workday, and a tight-knit circle of friends I'd known since our college days at UT. Among those friends, none mattered more to me than Marcus. Marcus was the kind of guy who commanded a room without ever lifting his voice. He was built like a classic American tight end, 6'4", easily 230 pounds of solid muscle, with a jawline that looked like it had been chiseled out of Texas limestone. He possessed this effortless, rugged charisma that drew people in, a stark contrast to my more reserved, analytical nature.
We had been roommates in college, drank cheap beer out of red plastic cups, helped each other move through countless cramped apartments, and stood as best men at each other's hypothetical weddings. Except Marcus never got married. He lived a fast, unpredictable life, jumping from high-stakes corporate sales jobs to brief, intense romances that always seemed to fizzle out because nobody could quite keep up with his energy. He was larger than life, a force of nature, and to me, he was the brother I never had. So when his life hit a massive, unexpected roadblock 3 months ago, there wasn't even a question in my mind about what to do. It happened over a series of disastrous weeks for Marcus. His tech startup collapsed after a major investor pulled funding, his high-rise apartment lease ended with an exorbitant rent hike he couldn't afford, and he found himself completely broke and unmoored for the first time in his life. I remember the night he called me from the parking lot of a local diner, his voice sounding uncharacteristically hollow, stripped of its usual booming confidence. He didn't ask for a handout, he was too proud for that, but I could hear the desperation vibrating through the cell phone tower. I didn't even consult Elena before I told him to pack his bags and come over. When I brought it up to her later that evening while we were washing dishes, she paused, her hands covered in soap suds, looking out the kitchen window into the darkened backyard. She seemed hesitant, a tiny crease forming between her eyebrows that I brushed off as mere surprise. She pointed out that our routine would change, that having a third person in our space might feel crowded, but I laughed it off, assuring her that it was Marcus, our guy, and that he'd be out on his feet in a month or 2. Reluctantly, she agreed, wiping her hands on a dish towel and giving me a soft smile that I now realize was laced with a quiet, creeping anxiety. The first few weeks were actually great. It felt like an extended college reunion. Marcus crashed on our oversized sectional sofa in the living room, refusing to take the guest bedroom because he claimed he didn't want to make himself too comfortable. He was incredibly respectful of our space, keeping his duffel bags neatly tucked away, washing his own dishes, and even buying groceries with the little cash he had left. On weekends, we would fire up the grill in the backyard, crack open a few local IPAs, and talk about everything from football to old college pranks. Elena would sit on the patio swing, sipping her Pinot Noir, laughing at our ridiculous stories. I felt a profound sense of pride seeing my wife and my best friend getting along so famously. Elena was a graphic designer, fiercely intelligent, but sometimes introverted, and Marcus had this uncanny ability to make her open up, challenging her on art theories or teasing her about her fiercely protective nature over our golden retriever. I thought I was being the ultimate provider, the perfect husband, and the most loyal friend all at once. I was completely blind to this subtle shift in the gravitational pull of my own home. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the dynamics began to warp. My job required me to travel to various construction sites across the state, meaning I was often away for 2 or 3 days a week, leaving early on Tuesday mornings and returning late on Thursday nights. I started noticing small changes whenever I came back. The house would smell differently. Not bad, but like a mixture of Marcus's heavy wood smoke cologne and Elena's floral perfume, a combined scent that lingered in the hallways long after they had finished talking. I'd walk into the kitchen and find them sitting at the island, heads close together over a laptop, laughing at some inside joke that they'd have to clumsily explain to me.
Marcus started taking up more physical space in the house. His presence felt massive, overwhelming. When he walked down the hallway, the floorboards groaned under his weight. When he laughed, his voice boomed through the walls. Next to him, I started feeling strangely small, like a guest in my own home, a spectator watching a vibrant, high-energy show that I wasn't fully a part of. The internal monologue of doubt didn't start as a loud accusation. It started as a pathetic, nagging whisper. I began comparing myself to him in ways I never had in our 15 years of friendship. I looked at my own reflection in the bathroom mirror. Average height, slightly thinning hair, a soft midsection from years of desk work. And then I'd think of Marcus, who spent 2 hours every morning lifting heavy iron in our garage, sweat glistening on his broad shoulders. I noticed how Elena's eyes would linger on him when he stretched, how her voice would pitch just a fraction higher when she spoke to him. I hated myself for thinking these things. It felt like a betrayal of my own character to doubt my wife, a woman who had sworn how life to me, and my best friend, a man who had bled for me in old bar fights. I told myself I was just stressed from work, that the long drives down I-35 were getting to my head, causing me to hallucinate tension where there was only hospitality. Then came the second month, and the atmosphere in the house grew dense, almost electrical. The easy, comfortable conversations between the three of us began to feel strained whenever I entered the room. It was like walking into a theater after the movie had already started. I had missed the setup, and everyone else knew the plot except me. Elena became more distant with me, less interested in hearing about my day, her phone constantly face down on the nightstand. When I tried to initiate intimacy, she would turn away, claiming she was exhausted from a heavy workload or that she had a migraine. But later that same night, through the thin, dry wall of our bedroom, I could hear her downstairs in the kitchen, her voice light and animated, talking to Marcus until 2 in the morning. I would lie awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above us, my chest tightening with an agonizing, nameless dread that I was too terrified to articulate. I was trapped in a prison of my own making, desperate to protect my marriage, but too proud to admit that I felt threatened by the very man I had invited under my roof. The breaking point arrived on a rainy Thursday in mid-November. I was scheduled to be in Houston until Friday afternoon, overseeing a major concrete pour, but a massive storm system rolled in, delaying the project and forcing the site to shut down early. By 3 in the afternoon, my boss told us to pack it up and head home. A wave of intense relief washed over me. I was exhausted, filthy, and desperate to just sink into my own bed, to hold my wife and feel that security I had been losing grip on. I didn't call Elena to tell her I was coming home early. I wanted it to be a surprise, a romantic gesture to break the icy wall that had built up between us over the past few weeks. I stopped by a local Central Market on the way into Austin, buying a prime cut of ribeye steak, a fresh loaf of sourdough bread, and a bottle of the expensive Italian red wine she loved. As I drove through the torrential downpour, the windshield wipers slapping a rhythmic beat against the glass, my heart was pounding with an odd mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. I kept imagining the look of joy on her face when I walked through the door, the way she would throw her arms around my neck and tell me how much she missed me. I wanted so badly to believe that everything was fine, that the dark clouds in my mind were just a passing storm, nothing more than the foolish paranoia of a tired man. I pulled into our driveway at exactly 8:45 p.m., the house completely dark except for a single warm amber light glowing from the upstairs master bedroom window. I turned off the ignition, and for a long moment, I just sat there in the dark cab of my truck, listening to the heavy rain drumming against the metal roof. The single light upstairs cast a long, trembling shadow across the wet leaves in the yard. I remember smiling to myself, thinking that Elena was probably reading in bed, winding down for the night, and that Marcus was likely out at a local bar or asleep downstairs on the couch. I grabbed the grocery bags from the passenger seat, protecting the bottle of wine under my arm, and stepped out into the pouring rain. Sprinting up the porch steps, I quietly unlocked the front door. Stepping into the entryway, the first thing that hit me was the absolute silence of the house. The downstairs was pitch black. The only illumination came from the streetlights outside, filtering through the blinds and throwing long, skeletal lines across the hardwood floor. I set the grocery bags down on the console table by the door with meticulous slowness, ensuring the glass bottle didn't clink. I slipped off my muddy work boots and hung my wet jacket on the peg. The house felt cold, but the air was thick, carrying that heavy, overlapping scent of wood smoke and floral perfume that had been haunting the hallways for weeks. My eyes adjusted to the dark, and as I glanced toward the living room, I noticed Marcus's makeshift bed on the sectional sofa was perfectly made. His blankets were folded neatly at the foot of the couch, and his usual clutter was gone. He wasn't downstairs. I felt a sudden, sharp prickle of unease at the back of my neck. It was a primal sensation, the kind of evolutionary instinct that tells a creature it's no longer safe in its own territory. I walked toward the staircase, my bare feet making absolutely no sound on the stairs. With every step I climbed, the silence of the house seemed to magnify, becoming so loud that I could hear the rushing of blood in my own ears. When I reached the top landing, I noticed that the door to our master bedroom was slightly ajar, a warm sliver of amber light spilling out onto the carpeted hallway. And then, cutting through the rhythmic sound of the rain outside, I heard a sound that made my entire body instantly freeze. It was a low, breathless laugh, a sound I knew better than my own name. It was Elena. But it wasn't the polite, casual laugh she gave when we were watching a comedy or talking to neighbors. It was an intimate, uninhibited sound, heavy with a raw, playful affection that I hadn't heard from her in over a year. My heart didn't just beat fast, it felt like it violently slammed against my ribs, a sudden, erratic thudding that threatened to choke me. I stopped breathing, my hand hovering inches away from the wooden doorframe, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the wall for support. Then came a voice. It was deep, rumbling and vibrating with an absolute casual authority that could only belong to one person. "You need to be quiet," Marcus whispered, his voice laced with a dark, confident amusement. "If he calls your phone and hears you breathing like that, the whole thing blows up." "He's in Houston, Marcus," Elena replied, her voice dropping into a breathless, desperate tone that cut through me like a serrated knife. "He's stuck on a flooded job site until tomorrow afternoon. He called me 3 hours ago to complain about the rain. We have all night. Stop worrying about him. He doesn't suspect a thing. He's too trusting for his own good." Hearing those words spoken by my wife, the woman whose hand I had held as her father passed away, the woman I had promised to protect for the rest of my life, inflicted a physical pain so intense it made my vision blur. It felt like a sudden, massive loss of oxygen. The hallway seemed to tilt, the walls closing in on me, as my brain desperately scrambled to process the reality of what was happening just 3 feet away from me. I was trapped in a horrific nightmare, standing outside my own bedroom, listening to my best friend and my wife speak about me like I was a fool, an inconvenient obstacle they had successfully outsmarted. I stepped closer to the gap in the door, my eyes straining against the amber light. Through the narrow opening, the reality of their betrayal unfolded in brutal cinematic clarity. The room was cast in the soft glow of the bedside lamp, casting massive overlapping shadows against the wall. Elena was sitting on the edge of our mattress, her back to me, her long dark hair falling over her bare shoulders. Standing directly in front of her was Marcus. He looked towering, a massive silhouette in the small room, his broad chest rising and falling in the warm light. He was looking down at her with a look of intense, possessive hunger that I had never seen on another human being's face. What happened next was a blur of raw, unfiltered emotion that completely stripped away my ability to think rationally. Marcus reached down, his large hands gripping her waist, lifting her effortlessly off the bed as if she weighed nothing at all. Elena let out a sharp, gasping breath, wrapping her legs around his waist, her fingers burying themselves into the thick muscles of his back. The sheer physical contrast between them was staggering. He was bigger, stronger, and possessed a dominant, overwhelming physicality that made the scene look like something out of a dark, forbidden fantasy. It was an unmitigated display of raw attraction that was completely beyond anything I had ever been able to give her, a level of passion that made our entire marriage look like a pale, passionless imitation. I stood there, paralyzed, watching my best friend hold my wife against his chest in the very room where we had built our life together. The absolute disrespect of it, the colossal violation of my home, my sanctuary, and my trust, felt like a heavy weight crushing down on my throat. I wanted to scream. I wanted to burst through the door, grab the heavy iron golf club from the closet, and violently reclaim what was mine. But my limbs felt like lead, entirely unresponsive to the frantic commands of my brain. I was completely unmoored, watching the two people I loved most in the world systematically destroy my existence with an effortless, smiling cruelty. They moved toward the center of the bed, their shadows merging into one giant, distorted shape against the ceiling. The sound of their shared breaths, the soft rustle of the sheets, and the quiet, desperate murmurs of validation they were giving each other echoed through the small room. Elena was telling him things she had never told me, confessing a deep, wild obsession with him that made me realize their betrayal wasn't just a sudden lapse in judgment. This had been brewing for months, a slow, toxic fire that had been burning right under my nose while I was out working 14-hour days to pay the mortgage on the house they were currently destroying. Every single interaction from the past 2 weeks flashed through my mind in a violent, agonizing montage. The shared looks at the kitchen island, the lingering scents in the hallway, the sudden headaches and distance. It all made perfect, sickening sense. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't crazy. I was just the final person to realize that my life was already over. The tears finally came, hot and silent, scalding my cheeks as I stood in the dark hallway. I felt a profound, suffocating sense of humiliation. I was the provider who had been discarded, the loyal friend who had been turned into a joke. I looked down at my hands, shaking uncontrollably in the dim light, and realized that if I walked into that room right now, I wouldn't just be confronting them, I would be validating their victory. I would be showing them exactly how broken I was. A cold, dark resolve began to settle over the frantic panic in my chest. I didn't want a screaming match. I didn't want a pathetic, desperate confrontation where they could look down on me and offer hollow apologies while standing naked in my bedroom. I wanted something else. I wanted to take away their power. Quietly, with the precision of a ghost, I backed away from the door. I retreated down the carpeted hallway, step by agonizing step, never taking my eyes off the sliver of amber light until I reached the top of the stairs. I descended into the blackness of the downstairs living room, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I stood in the dark kitchen, looking at the grocery bags on the table, the expensive wine, the prime steaks I had bought to celebrate a homecoming that didn't exist. The rain outside was still coming down in sheets, slamming against the window panes like a relentless judgment. I reached into my pocket, my fingers wrapping around my car keys, a desperate, wild plan beginning to form in the shattered ruins of my mind. I didn't pick up the groceries. I didn't grab my jacket. I just stepped back into my mud-covered work boots, quietly turned the brass handle of the front door, and walked back out into the torrential Texas downpour. The rain hit me like a physical blow, instantly soaking through my shirt, but the freezing water on my skin was the only thing keeping me from entirely losing my mind. I climbed back into the cab of my truck, closed the door with a soft, muted click, and sat there in the dark. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely fit the key into the ignition. When the engine roared to life, the headlights sliced through the darkness, illuminating the front of our house. I immediately switched them off, leaving only the amber running lights on, terrified they would look out the window and see me sitting there like a ghost. I pulled out of the driveway, my tires spinning slightly on the wet asphalt, and drove aimlessly into the night. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to put distance between myself and the bedroom where my life had just been dismantled. I ended up in the back corner of a 24-hour Walmart parking lot, parked under a buzzing, flickering security light that cast a sickly purple glow over the wet pavement. I turned off the engine, and the silence that followed was deafening. I sat there for an hour, staring blankly at the dashboard, my chest heaving as the reality of the betrayal settled deep into my bones. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on my lungs until I could barely breathe. Marcus, a guy I had carried through his worst moments, a guy I called a brother, had looked at my life, my home, and my wife, and decided he had a right to take them just because he was physically imposing enough to do it. And Elena, the woman who knew every single one of my flaws, every insecurity I had ever confessed in the quiet hours of the night, had used that exact knowledge to turn me into a punchline. "He's too trusting for his own good." The words replayed in my head on an agonizing, endless loop, each repetition carving a deeper wound into my chest. They thought I was weak. They thought my decency, my loyalty, and my love were signs of a man who could be walked all over without ever pushing back. As the initial paralyzing shock began to morph into a cold, calculating rage, a terrifyingly clear thought crystallized in my mind. If I went back there right now and started a screaming match, I would lose. Marcus could easily overpower me, and Elena would see me at my absolute lowest, broken, crying, and begging for answers they didn't care to give. They had already written the script for how this would go if I found out. They expected me to be the devastated, compliant husband who would quietly pack a suitcase and file for a standard divorce, leaving them to inherit the life I had built. But they didn't know I was already standing outside that door. They didn't know I had the ultimate advantage, the element of absolute secrecy. I pulled out my phone. My hands had finally stopped shaking, replaced by a strange, icy stillness. I opened our shared bank account app. Every single dollar I earned from my grueling travel weeks went into that account. Elena's graphic design freelance income was sporadic, barely covering her own credit card bills, while my salary maintained the mortgage, the utilities, and the lifestyle she enjoyed.
I sat there in the dark cab of the truck and systematically began moving money. I opened a new, private checking account at a completely different bank online, a process that took less than 10 minutes. Then I transferred 80% of our liquid savings into it, leaving just enough in the joint account so it wouldn't immediately trigger an automated low balance alert on her phone. Next, I opened my laptop, routing my internet through my phone's hotspot. I logged into our cellular network provider's administrative account. Because I paid the bill, my name was the primary holder. I pulled up the detailed text and call logs for Elena's number over the past 2 months. There it was, pages and pages of data. Thousands of encrypted messages sent through data apps, but more importantly, hundreds of standard multimedia picture messages and late-night calls exchanged between her and Marcus during the exact days I was away in Houston, Dallas, and San Antonio. The timestamps aligned perfectly with the days I had been pulling 14-hour shifts on concrete slabs. I downloaded the entire spreadsheet of logs, saving it to a secure cloud drive, alongside a digital copy of our marriage certificate and the deed to the house. But I wasn't done. The true depth of my anger required something more cinematic, something that would completely strip them of their arrogance. I looked at the dashboard clock. It was 11:30 p.m.
They were likely still upstairs, wrapped in the comfort of my bed, completely oblivious to the fact that the ground beneath them was already dissolving. I started the truck, put it in drive, and headed back toward our neighborhood. I didn't park in our driveway this time. I parked 2 blocks away, under the shadow of a large oak tree on a quiet side street, and walked back to the house on foot through the tripping trees. I let myself in through the back patio door, using the spare key hidden inside the fake rock by the garden, a key Marcus didn't know about. I slipped off my boots again and moved through the pitch black downstairs like a thief. My heart was hammering, but my mind was incredibly sharp. I walked into the kitchen and looked at the island. Elena's laptop was sitting there, closed but plugged into the charger. She always kept her password simple, an old anniversary date we shared. I lifted the lid, typed in the digits, and the screen illuminated her face. My stomach dropped as I opened her personal messaging applications. I didn't even have to search for his name. His thread was pinned at the top. I scrolled up, my eyes burning as I read the casual, cruel messages they had sent each other while I was sitting in hotel rooms across Texas. They joked about my work ethic. Marcus had sent her a photo of a high-end watch he wanted, captioning it, "Maybe your boy will buy this for me next if he gets that holiday bonus."
Elena had replied with a laughing emoji, followed by, "He lives to please us, doesn't he?" Seeing it in writing, black ink on a bright screen, destroyed any lingering shred of mercy I had left in my heart. I didn't delete anything. Instead, I took out my own phone and filmed a steady, high-definition video scrolling through the entire conversation, capturing every single photo, every mocking joke, and every detailed plan they made to meet up the moment my truck pulled out of the driveway.
I exported the chat logs directly to my email, closed her laptop exactly as I found it, and wiped down the keys with my shirt. Before I left the kitchen, I glanced at the counter and saw the keys to Marcus's truck, the old, unreliable Ford F-150 he had managed to keep through his bankruptcy. I knew for a fact that the truck was registered in his name, but the insurance had lapsed 2 weeks ago because he couldn't afford the premium. I had actually offered to help him pay it, but he had proudly declined, saying he'd handle it once his new sales gig started. I took a quick photo of his license plate number from the registration paperwork he kept in the kitchen junk drawer. I walked back out into the rain, returning to my truck completely undetected. I sat in the driver's seat, the heater blowing warm air against my frozen hands, looking at the evidence compiled on my phone.
I had the money, I had the chat logs, and I had a video that would legally and socially dismantle both of them in a modern court of law. But I didn't want to just file a lawsuit. I wanted the confrontation to happen entirely on my terms, at a moment where they would feel completely exposed, stripped of the physical superiority and arrogance they had used to humiliate me. I put the truck in gear and drove to a cheap motel near the highway, checking into a room that smelled of stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner. Tomorrow morning, the game would change. I didn't sleep a single second that night. I sat on the edge of the squeaking motel mattress, watching the neon sign of a diner across the highway blink through the cracked plastic blinds. By 5 a.m, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the Texas sky a cold, bruised shade of purple. I washed my face with freezing water, looked at my reflection in the rusted mirror, and realized the man who had walked out of that house the night before was gone. In his place was someone entirely detached, operating with a cold, mechanical focus. At exactly 6:30 a.m., I pulled my truck back onto our street. The neighborhood was just waking up, the morning mist rising off the wet lawns. I didn't hide this time. I pulled directly into the driveway, letting my tires crunch loudly over the gravel, and slammed the truck door shut with deliberate force. I wanted them to hear me. I wanted to give them those few frantic seconds of pure adrenaline-spiked panic as they realized the husband they thought was safe in Houston was suddenly downstairs. As I unlocked the front door, I heard the frantic, heavy scuffling of footsteps coming from upstairs. I walked into the kitchen, pulled out one of the heavy iron bar stools at the island, and sat down. I picked up the bottle of expensive Italian wine I had left on the console table the night before, placed it squarely in the center of the counter, and waited. A minute later, Marcus came down the stairs first. He was wearing a pair of gray sweatpants, his massive chest bare, his hair disheveled. He was trying desperately to look casual, to summon that booming, effortless charisma that had always defined him, but I could see the slight tremor in his jawline. His eyes darted to the wine bottle, then to my mud-covered boots, and finally to my face. "Hey, man," Marcus said, his voice a fraction lower than usual, attempting a sleepy chuckle. "What are you doing back? Thought you were stuck in Houston until this afternoon. Elena said the roads were completely flooded down there." Before I could answer, Elena stepped into the kitchen. She had thrown on a silk robe, wrapping it tightly around her waist, her face completely pale, stripped of all the confidence she had possessed the night before. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a terrifying mixture of guilt and calculation, her brain frantically trying to gauge exactly how much I knew. "Hey, babe," she whispered, her voice cracking slightly. She moved toward the coffee maker, an automated reflex to pretend everything was normal. "You should have texted me. I would have made sure the house was ready. Marcus was just about to head out to look at a new apartment today." I didn't say a word. I just sat there, my arms crossed, watching them play their roles. The absolute silence in the room became unbearable, stretching out until Marcus shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the floorboards groaning under his massive frame. That physical dominance that had intimidated me the night before now looked incredibly pathetic. He was a grown man hiding behind a facade of brotherhood while living off my hard work. "You left your laptop open last night, Elena," I said, my voice entirely flat, devoid of any anger or sorrow. It was the calm voice of a man reading a weather report. Elena froze, her hand hovering over a coffee mug, the color completely drained from her lips. "What?" she whispered. "I came home at 8:45 last night," I continued, looking directly into Marcus's eyes. "The rain shut the site down early. I bought steaks. I bought that wine on the counter. And I walked upstairs to surprise my wife. But the door was open.
The air in the kitchen instantly turned to ice.
Marcus froze, his chest expanding as he took a sharp defensive breath, his fists clenched at his sides, his instinctual response to a threat turning physical. For a fraction of a second, that familiar whisper of fear tried to creep back into my mind, reminding me that he was bigger, stronger, and entirely capable of hurting me. But I didn't back down. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and laid it face up on the marble island. "Don't even think about it, Marcus," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a razor blade. Before I walked back out into the rain last night, I downloaded every single chat log from Elena's computer. I filmed a high-definition video of the entire thread, including the jokes you both made about me paying for your lifestyle while you were destroying my marriage. I transferred 80% of our liquid savings into a private account. And 3 minutes ago, while I was sitting in my truck in the driveway, I hit send on an email. Elena stumbled backwards slightly, her hand gripping the edge of the counter for support. "An email to who?" she choked out, tears finally springing to her eyes. "To your parents, Elena. To your brother, to your freelance design clients, and to every single one of our mutual college friends," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "It contains the full spreadsheet of your text logs, the timestamps from the nights I was working in Dallas, and the video of your chat history with Marcus. By the time the sun is fully up, everyone you know will understand exactly what kind of people you both are." Marcus took a sudden, aggressive step toward the island, his face turning a dark, furious crimson. "You think you're smart, you little piece of—" "I also called the local police department's non-emergency line about 10 minutes ago," I interrupted, staring him down without blinking. "I reported an uninsured, unregistered vehicle parked illegally on our residential street. I gave them your license plate number, Marcus. There's a patrol car pulling up around the corner right now. If you're still on my property when they get here, I'll personally hand them the documentation proving you've been driving that truck without a license or coverage for the last 3 weeks." As if on cue, the faint, distant reflection of red and blue lights began to flash through the kitchen window, cutting through the morning mist. Marcus stopped dead in his tracks, the tough, untouchable alpha persona completely shattered, replaced by the look of a panicked, broke criminal who couldn't afford another legal disaster. He looked at Elena, then at me, realizing he had absolutely no leverage left. Without saying a single word, he turned on his heel, ran upstairs, and grabbed his duffel bags. Less than 2 minutes later, the front door slammed shut so hard the glass panes rattled, and I watched through the window as he was stopped by a police cruiser at the edge of our neighborhood. The kitchen was dead silent again, save for the sound of Elena's quiet, desperate sobbing. She fell to her knees on the hardwood floor, her silk robe dragging in the dust, her hands reaching out toward my boots in a pathetic display of delayed remorse. "Please," she begged, her voice trembling violently. "Please, it didn't mean anything. It was just a stupid mistake. He was just there, and I was lonely, and I didn't know what I was doing. Please, don't do this to us. We can go to counseling. We can fix this. I love you." I looked down at her, and for the first time in 7 years, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no hatred, no lingering spark of love. The larger-than-life illusion they had created the night before had completely vanished, leaving behind nothing but a broken, dishonest woman and a bankrupt coward. "You have until noon to get your things out of my house," I said quietly, standing up from the bar stool. "The locks are being changed at 1 o'clock. My lawyer will be contacting you with the divorce paperwork by the end of the week. Don't ever call my phone again." I walked out of the kitchen, leaving her crying on the floor next to the expensive, unopened bottle of wine. As I stepped back out onto the porch, the fresh morning air filled my lungs, clean and cold. The betrayal had been shocking, a brutal storm that had completely leveled the life I knew. But as I climbed back into my truck and drove away, I finally realized something they never understood. Being a good, trusting man wasn't a weakness. It was my greatest strength, and they were the ones who were leaving with absolutely nothing